My name is Lily Carter, and on an ordinary evening in my small Seattle apartment, I discovered something no one should ever find out from a notification on their phone. I was dead. At least, according to my parents. A friend sent me a link, and when I opened it, I froze. There it was, an obituary with my name, my photo, and a tragic story about an 8-year-old girl who died in a car accident. My mother wrote the tribute. My father approved it. Relatives and neighbors left heartfelt comments, mourning a girl who is very much alive. Why? Because my parents had declared me dead to collect my life insurance money, and they got away with it for 10 years. This is the story of how I walked into a family gathering a decade later and said, "Remember me?" And the entire room turned to stone. Have you ever been treated like you don't exist? And where in the world are you listening from, and at what time? If you've never grown up in a picture-perfect American suburb, let me paint it for you the way it lived in my memory, soft around the edges, sun-bleached, and carefully curated like the front page of a church bulletin. Our house sat on a quiet street in a small Ohio suburb, the kind where every lawn looked freshly trimmed, every porch had a tasteful seasonal wreath, and every mailbox had little flags on the side that people actually used. My father, Mark Carter, insisted on mowing the lawn twice a week even when it didn't need it, because people notice these things. Lily. He hung the American flag outside the front porch every holiday and liked to say we were the kind of family others looked up to. Not in a humble way, more in a don't you dare embarrass me way. My mother, Diane, was the kind of woman people in town called pure-hearted or selfless, the one who always volunteered to organize church events, bake sales, charity auctions, anything that let her stand in front of a crowd with a microphone and a soft, trembling smile. She loved phrases like, "for the community and the Lord has blessed us," but as a child I always had the strange feeling that the blessing she cherished most was the spotlight. And then there was Hannah, my little sister, the golden child, the apple of the town's eye. She was pretty in the exact way little girls are encouraged to be in places like ours: bright blonde hair, big cheerful smile, natural performer. By 12 she was a cheerleader. By 14 she had an entire ecosystem of adults doting on her every move. "She's a star," they'd say. "That kid is going places." And then there was me. The other one. The quiet one. My hair was darker, my clothes never quite right. I liked books more than people, spent afternoons sketching in cheap notebooks, taking apart old radios, tinkering with our sluggish family computer. I wasn't shy, exactly, I just preferred the company of ideas. But in a household obsessed with presentation, a daughter who preferred thinking to smiling was a problem. My father once told me, in that half-joking way he used when he meant every word, "Lily, honey, I'm not asking you to be a beauty queen. Just don't scare off boys by looking so serious all the time." I remember sitting at the kitchen table, a science magazine open in front of me, thinking, I'm 14. Why are boys even part of this conversation? But in our house, the future was a script already written. Hannah would marry well, make us proud, and I would hopefully not ruin the aesthetic. My mother was subtler. Her comments came wrapped in sweetness. "Try smiling more, sweetheart. It'll make you prettier." Or, "I know you love your books, but life is about connection. Look at Hannah, she lights up a room." It's strange how favoritism, when done gently, can feel like air everywhere, invisible, impossible to point at directly. But even as a child, I felt its weight. I felt it at school events where my parents cheered loudly for Hannah's routines, but sat politely silent through my art displays. I felt it in the small moments: birthday cakes that were always Hannah's favorite flavor, the way family friends would pinch her cheek and barely nod at me. I felt it most during holidays. Let me take you back to one of our Christmases. The house would be glowing with warm lights. Our tree decorated with ornaments Hannah had made in her cheer squad, each one spotlighted like museum pieces. I'd be in the kitchen, elbow deep in soapy water, washing dishes from the early dinner, because you're better with quiet tasks, Lily. While I scrubbed, I could hear laughter floating from the dining room, compliments showering on Hannah as she opened expensive gifts, clothes, jewelry, a tablet she'd earned by simply being herself. My father would raise his glass and say something like, "Hannah, You make us so proud," while my mother dabbed her eyes, moved by her own theatrics. When I finally finished cleaning and tried to slip into the room, someone, an uncle, a cousin, a family friend, would inevitably make the same tired joke. "There's our little oddball." They meant it affectionately, I think. But affection can bruise, too. I'd laugh it off because a child doesn't have the language to say, "This isn't funny. This hurts." Instead, you swallow it. Over and over. Until the swallowing becomes instinct. Hannah never needed to ask for attention. It dripped from the walls, from the guests, from our parents. She was the investment. My father literally used that word once when talking to a neighbor. "We're putting everything into Hannah. That girl's going to shine." I was standing 2 feet away, holding a bag of groceries. He didn't lower his voice. He didn't even glance at me. That's the part that stays with you, not just the neglect, but the casualness of it. Like you were never part of the frame to begin with. My role in the Carter household was functional, not emotional. I babysat Hannah, helped her practice routines, prepped snacks for her friends, cleaned her room when she didn't feel like it. If I protested, my mother would tilt her head gently, as if disappointed in my lack of sisterly love. "You're the older one, Lily. You should set an example." But what she really meant was, be invisible, be useful. Don't disrupt the picture. Looking back, I realized the house itself was like a stage set. The polished entryway, the immaculate living room, the family portraits where my mother insisted we tilt our heads just so, all of it was an illusion curated for outsiders. The perfect Christian family, the successful suburban home, the parents who did everything right. And in every staged photo, Hannah always stood in front, glowing. I stood slightly behind, always a little out of focus. There's one memory that still hits me harder than I'd like to admit. I was 16, and our school organized a science fair. I built a working model of a small automated irrigation system, nothing fancy, but all mine. When the judges announced I'd won second place, I looked toward the bleachers, searching for my parents' faces. They weren't there. They had gone to watch Hannah's cheer practice instead. I walked home alone that day, ribbon in hand. When I showed it to them later, my mother smiled distractedly and said, "Second place is still good, honey." Before launching into a long story about how amazing Hannah had been at practice. My father didn't even look up from his laptop. "That's nice." Just 2 words. That was all I got. At the time, I didn't have the vocabulary to explain the ache sitting behind my ribs. I didn't know about family systems or scapegoats or the psychological gymnastics that make a child believe neglect is normal. All I knew was that no matter how gently favoritism is delivered, it still lands like a slap you're expected to thank them for. But now, at 28, with the clarity distance brings, I can name it plainly. I was the scapegoat in a family obsessed with appearing perfect. Hannah was the golden child, the proof of their success. I was the reminder of everything they didn't want to see: independence, difference, disobedience, truth. And maybe that's why burying me first emotionally, then literally on paper, was so easy for them. When a family spends years pretending your voice doesn't matter, pretending you don't belong, pretending your feelings are inconveniences, pretending you're dead is just one step further into the lie they've always lived in. 17 is an age that looks shiny from the outside: prom dresses, SAT prep books, bright futures. But for me, 17 felt like living inside a pressure cooker disguised as a happy Christian household. By then, I had learned the rhythm of favoritism in our home so well I could predict it like the weather. Hannah's achievements were spring sunshine, mine were quiet, passing clouds. Still, something inside me, some small ember of my own life, kept glowing. It glowed when I coded little games on our outdated family computer. It glowed in the way my heart beat faster reading about universities in Seattle or Denver, cities where no one would look at me like I was an afterthought. And it glowed brightest the day I opened the email telling me I'd scored high on my SAT, high enough for big scholarships. I remember sitting at the kitchen table, the laminate surface slightly sticky from someone's spilled juice, staring at my score as if it were a passport to another planet. A planet where I wasn't the wrong daughter. Where I was enough. I printed the score out and tucked it in my binder, imagining the moment I would show my parents. I thought, stupidly, that they might be proud. But deep down, A quieter, wiser part of me already suspected the truth. Pride was reserved for Hannah. I was meant to stay small, predictable, useful. Then there was my relationship with Ethan. He was funny, kind, came from a working-class Hispanic family, and treated me like I mattered. We met in a computer repair elective, of all places, soldering old motherboard pieces in a dusty back room of the school. He was the first person who ever said, "You're really good at this, you know," and meant it without comparison to someone else. The first person who looked at my interests as strengths rather than flaws. We were careful, quiet about it. But in a town where gossip travels like wildfire, and my father knew everyone from church to the bank branch he managed, secrets don't stay secret for long. My parents found out about Ethan the same week they discovered I'd applied to schools out of state. I had done it in silence, using school computers, my guidance counselor helping me with essays and FAFSA forms like she was doing something sacred, and maybe she was. When the acceptance email arrived from a university in Seattle, offering a partial scholarship and a small paid internship with a local tech startup, I sat in the school parking lot and cried into my hoodie. Not out of fear, out of hope. Real, choking, terrifying hope. But hope is dangerous in a family that relies on control. Some people talk about the moment their lives split into before and after. For me, it was a Thursday night in May. The family meeting. My father's voice had that artificially calm tone he used when preparing to punish someone. My mother's hands were clasped at her chest like she was auditioning for a church skit about suffering. Hannah sat with her chin lifted, already rehearsing her superiority. I walked into the dining room and knew immediately that something had been discovered. My printed acceptance letter sat on the table, next to a screenshot of a photo Ethan and I had taken at a school fair. "Explain this," my father said, tapping the letter with 2 fingers like it was evidence of criminal behavior. "I got accepted," I said softly, trying to hold my ground. I want to study computer science. They offered me a scholarship. And a paid internship." My voice trembled despite every effort not to let it. My father leaned back, arms crossed. "And when were you planning to tell us? After you ran off to some crime-infested city across the country?" My mother shook her head with exaggerated heartbreak. "Lily, how could you go behind our backs like this? We raised you better than that." Hannah snickered. "It's so weird imagining you in Seattle. They actually hire people like you?" It escalated fast after that. My father listed all the reasons Seattle was dangerous, immoral, liberal, full of people who would eat you alive. My mother insisted I apply to nursing instead, a stable job, honey. And it's what good girls do. They pushed community college, staying home, helping with Hannah's schedule. They never asked what I wanted, because wanting was a privilege only Hannah was allowed. Then came the line that made my stomach drop. "And this boy," my father said, sliding the photo of Ethan toward me. "This is the kind of future you think you deserve?" The tone wasn't just disgust, it was contempt. "He's not from our world." My mother added gently, the kind of false gentleness that cuts deeper than shouting. "He'll hold you back, sweetheart. You're meant for more than that." "He treats me well," I whispered. "He respects me." "Respect won't get you anywhere in life," my father snapped. "Status will. Connections will. Stability will." Then he set the terms like a judge delivering a sentence. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to break up with him. You're going to stay here. You'll enroll in community college, like we planned, and if you obey, we'll pay for your tuition. If you don't." He let the words hang, heavy and intentional. My mother chimed in, "We're only trying to protect you. You make us look ungrateful when you rebel." My father's voice hardened further. "This family has a reputation, Lily. You've embarrassed us enough." Something inside me, some old, tired part that had spent years bending, finally snapped. I felt it clearly, like a thread pulling free. My hands were cold, but my voice came out steady. "No," I said, a simple word. But in our house, it was an earthquake. My father narrowed his eyes. "What did you say?" "No." I repeated, louder this time. "I'm not staying. I'm not breaking up with him. I'm going to Seattle." I took a breath. "This is my life. I get to choose it. With or without your permission." The room went still. My mother inhaled sharply, tears blooming instantly, not sadness, but weaponized disappointment. Hannah stared at me with fascinated horror, like she'd just witnessed someone lick an outlet. My father's face turned a shade I'd never seen before, deep, furious red. Then he slammed his fist against the table so hard the silverware rattled. "Get out," he roared. "Get out of my house." My heart jumped into my throat. He wasn't finished. "You want to make your own choices? Fine. But not under my roof. You are no longer our daughter." Hannah strutted past me, tossed a cheap duffel bag at my feet, and said, "Hope Seattle likes weirdos." My mother didn't stop her. She didn't stop him. She only pressed a hand dramatically to her mouth and whispered, "You've destroyed this family, Lily." And, just like that, the verdict was sealed. I packed in silence. A few shirts, my laptop, a pair of jeans, a toothbrush, the little envelope of tips I'd saved from working part-time at the diner. It was pathetic, really 18 years in that house, and I could fit everything I owned into one cheap bag. When I walked out the door, the porch light flicked off behind me, as if even the house wanted me gone. I stood on the front lawn, the air thick with the scent of freshly cut grass, and something else I couldn't name: freedom, maybe, or grief. I told myself the worst part was over. I told myself that losing a family that never wanted me wasn't really a loss. I told myself I was walking toward a new life. What I didn't know, what I couldn't possibly imagine, was that 10 years later, I wouldn't just lose the Carter family. I would lose my own name, my own record, my existence. They hadn't just told me I wasn't their daughter. A decade later, they would decide I wasn't alive at all. Seattle didn't welcome me with open arms. It greeted me with a gray sky, a wet sidewalk, and the kind of cold that settles into your bones before you even realize you're shivering. But even that felt better than the silence of my childhood home. At least this cold was honest. At least this city didn't pretend to love me while quietly wishing I'd disappear. I landed with one duffel bag, a laptop that overheated whenever I opened more than 3 tabs, and exactly $312 from diner tips and odd jobs. My first living situation was a cramped shared room in a student housing complex, the kind where the walls were thin enough to hear your neighbors argue about ramen flavors. I lived with a girl named Kayla, a loud, chaotic theater student who talked like every sentence was a monologue. We couldn't have been more different, but she was the first person who ever said, "You're safe here," and meant it. My days fell into a brutal rhythm. Mornings behind a barista counter, wiping milk steam off my apron while tourists ordered complicated lattes I barely understood. Afternoons in community college classrooms, collecting credits one by one like stepping stones toward the degree I knew I needed. Nights repairing laptops for extra cash, or coding simple websites for small businesses that didn't know their fonts weren't supposed to blink. I slept maybe 4 or 5 hours on a good night. I lived on black coffee, dollar store noodles, and determination. There were moments, tiny, sharp moments, when my hand would hover over my phone late at night, tempted to call home. To say I was alive, to say I was trying. To ask, just once, if my mother ever regretted letting me walk out that door. But then I'd hear my father's voice echoing from memory, cold and final, "You are no longer our daughter." The words acted like a lid, sealing the ache inside. So, I never made the call. Not once. Instead, I held on to the things that survived with me. My curiosity, my stubbornness. My hands that always wanted to take things apart and figure out how they worked. In one of my programming classes, a professor told me, "You think like an engineer, Lily." No one had ever said something like that to me. It sparked something. A belief in myself I didn't know I was allowed to have. I started picking up more coding gigs. Small ones at first, fixing outdated systems for mom and pop stores, writing little security scripts for college clubs. I didn't realize it then, but those tiny projects were the stepping stones to everything that came after. Around year 3, I transferred to a university in Seattle. The campus was enormous and intimidating, full of students whose parents visited often, sent care packages, and showed up at events. I watched them from a distance, my chest tightening in a way I learned to ignore. I survived on scholarships, grants, and the sheer force of needing to prove to myself more than anyone that I wasn't the failure my parents had assumed I'd become. It was during a security workshop that everything shifted. A guest lecturer, a wiry, excitable engineer from a local cybersecurity startup, ran a Capture the Flag challenge. I solved a complex encryption puzzle in under 10 minutes. He stared at me like I'd grown a second head. "Have you ever considered working in cybersecurity?" he asked. I shrugged. "I don't really know anything formally." He replied, "You don't need formal. You need instinct. And you've got it." 2 weeks later, he helped me land a part-time internship. That internship changed everything. It wasn't glamorous, plenty of tedious debugging, mountains of documentation, long nights staring at lines of code until they danced. But I was good at it. Really good. The kind of good that feels like the universe finally admitting you belong somewhere. I found logic comforting. Systems were honest. Unlike people, code didn't pretend to be something it wasn't. If something was wrong, it broke openly. It made sense. Years 5 through 8 blurred together. I graduated. I got hired full-time. I moved into a slightly bigger apartment with a door that actually locked and a window view that included more than a brick wall. I made friends, real friends with people who didn't look at me like a shadow in someone else's spotlight. And somewhere along the way, I fell in love again. This time, with someone who treated me like a human being rather than a disappointment. Jordan. Smart, gentle, funny in a dry way that made ordinary moments feel like little treasures. He never asked much about my family, and I never offered. Some silences feel safer that way. By year 8, I was leading a small team at my company, working on security protocols that could have terrified teenage me. I'd become someone I couldn't have imagined back in that Ohio dining room. Confident, capable, respected. But the biggest turning point came in year 9, when a former colleague approached me with an idea, a new cybersecurity startup, small but ambitious, and they wanted me as a co-founder, me. The girl who used to wash dishes while her sister opened presents. The girl who was told she'd ruin her life by studying tech. I said yes. And, for the first time, I said it without fear. The startup was lean, exhausting, exhilarating. There were nights we slept in the office, arguing over architecture or debugging until sunrise. But it was ours. And it grew. Slowly, then suddenly. Clients came. Investors noticed. By year 10, I had a solid salary, equity shares, and a team who trusted my judgment. I had an apartment filled with things I chose. A life I had built piece by piece. From scratch, without anyone's permission. And through all of it, every small victory, every milestone, I never heard from my family. No calls. No emails. No accidental sightings. If they thought I had disappeared, then good. Disappearing had allowed me to survive. Some nights, I'd lie awake and think about them not with longing, but with a strange, detached curiosity. Did they ever wonder where I went? Did Hannah ever miss me? Did my mother ever replay that night I left? I doubted it. If anything, I imagined they slept easier without me, relieved the troublesome daughter was no longer around to ruin their perfect narrative. Eventually, I told myself a story, one that felt easier than the truth. They're happier without you. You're the child they erased. And maybe that's okay. But I didn't know, not yet, how literal that erasure would become. I didn't know there was an obituary waiting for me on a church website. A death certificate filed under my name. Insurance money paid out to the people who once told me I wasn't their daughter. I didn't know that the life I built, every inch of it hard-earned, was living in the shadow of a girl who, according to my family, had died at 18 and never made it out of Ohio. It would take 10 years for the truth to reach me. 10 years before I realized the past I thought I'd outrun hadn't just followed me, it had buried me. And when I discovered what they'd done, the girl they tried to kill off would rise again. Not as their daughter, but as the woman they never expected me to become. I wish I could tell you that after finding my own obituary, I took a day to breathe, to process, to let the weight of it settle. But that's not how my mind works, especially not after a decade of surviving on instinct. My brain flipped immediately into analysis, Mode, the same mode that helped me debug systems at 3 in the morning or trace breaches across tangled networks. I treated my own death like a corrupted file. If there was a record claiming I had died, then somewhere a system had logged it, and systems don't invent entries by accident, people make them. Someone had filed my death on purpose. Someone had typed my name into the line that asked for deceased. She hadn't just let me disappear from her life. She had erased me, officially, legally, entirely. My hands shook as I scrolled to the section listing the hospital and the physician who supposedly handled the case. The hospital name was one I didn't recognize, an unlicensed urgent care that, according to a quick search, had shut down years ago for failing inspections. The attending physician's name returned 0 results. No license. No history. No existence. My breath hitched when I clicked it open. It was horrifyingly simple. A single sheet of PDF with my name at the top, a case number, a date just 2 months after my 18th birthday, and the cause of death listed as motor vehicle accident, fatal injuries sustained. A location: bridge on County Road 7. A note: no resuscitation attempted. My mouth went dry. I had never even been on County Road 7. Not once. But the detail that made my pulse spike wasn't the fake accident or the location. It was the line midway down the page that read, "Informant, Diane Carter, mother." My mother had signed the paper that declared me dead. I stared at her signature for a long time. I knew that swooping D, the careful curve of her last name. She always practiced her handwriting to look presentation ready. Suddenly, every memory of her crying in church, her trembly voice saying things like, "The Lord gives and takes away," made a sick kind of sense. She hadn't just let me disappear from her life. She had erased me, officially, legally, entirely. My hands shook as I scrolled to the section listing the hospital and the physician who supposedly handled the case. The hospital name was one I didn't recognize, an unlicensed urgent care that, according to a quick search, had shut down years ago for failing inspections. The attending physician's name returned 0 results. No license. No history. No existence. The funeral home listed had been sued for fraud multiple times. Everything pointed to a fabricated chain: a ghost hospital, a ghost doctor, a ghost funeral home. And me, the ghost child. But the question kept burning at the center of my chest: why? Why go this far? Why create an entire fake death? Why take the risk? Why lie so thoroughly? There was one answer that made my stomach twist even before I confirmed it. Insurance. My father had worked in insurance for years. And I had a sinking, nauseating suspicion who that someone was. The next morning, after a night of almost no sleep, I sat down at my dining table, really just a converted IKEA desk, and pulled up the public records database for the county I grew up in. I typed Lily Marie Carter, entered my birth date, clicked search. For a few seconds, the page loaded slowly, each pixel flickering like a taunt. Then it appeared. My death certificate. A real one. Registered, stamped, approved. Maybe she sensed the tremble in my voice. Maybe she'd seen something like this before. She made a call. 20 minutes later, she texted, "Call me. Now." When I answered, her voice was low. "Lily, the policy existed." My stomach flipped. "What policy?" "A life insurance policy," she said carefully. "Your parents opened it when you were 15. Large coverage. And the payout was issued 6 months after your listed date of death." For a moment, the room spun. My throat tightened. "How much?" She hesitated, then whispered, $280,000. My vision tunneled. That amount of money, that wasn't grief. That wasn't a mistake. It was a motive. A reward. I pressed my hand to my mouth, as if that could keep the shock from spilling out. Priya continued gently. "The payout went to Mark and Diane Carter. They collected it without any dispute." I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling as the truth hit me like a freight train. My parents didn't just disown me. They didn't just erase me from their memories. They made sure I was dead on paper, so they could profit from it. Money for a child, they said, didn't exist. Money for a daughter they told me not to be. A life insurance policy opened when I was still young, still living under their roof, still hoping they'd someday be proud of me. They planned for my death before I even turned 16. I opened the death certificate again, this time noticing details I had missed in my shock. The policy number was scribbled in the corner. The claim had been filed exactly 5 days after the supposed accident. 5 days. That was all it took. 5 days to turn me into a payout. I clicked through the records again, pulling up property documents next, driven by something between morbid curiosity and forensic instinct. My father had paid off their mortgage around the same time the payout was issued. My mother's event planning business had expanded shortly afterward, new equipment, new website, new decor pieces she bragged about on Facebook. And Hannah, my sister, who had never lifted a finger for anything, got a brand new SUV the year after my death. My funeral had funded their dreams. I don't know how long I sat there in silence. Time felt meaningless, like the clock had frozen the moment I realized how completely they had betrayed me. My chest felt hollow, as if a vacuum had opened inside. But beneath the shock, beneath the disbelief, another emotion began to rise. Slow, cold, steady. A kind of anger that didn't flare or burn. It crystallized, sharpened. An anger that belonged to someone who finally understood the magnitude of what had been stolen from her. I had rebuilt myself from scratch, every job, every class, every late-night project, every inch of progress earned alone. Meanwhile, my parents had taken out money for my death, spending it on cars and businesses and the life they always wanted Hannah to have. And the worst part? On paper, they were right. On paper, I was dead. In the eyes of the state of Ohio, Lily Carter died at 18. The woman sitting in my Seattle apartment, holding printouts of forged documents, technically didn't exist. I opened the final document Priya had sent me, a screenshot of the insurance system. At the bottom, in clear black letters, were the words, "Paid to beneficiary. Mark and Diane Carter." I exhaled, a sound halfway between a laugh and a shiver. Then I looked straight into the invisible camera of the life I had created and whispered the truth. That was the moment I realized this wasn't a family conflict. I told myself. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a dramatic falling out. I touched the screen lightly, tracing the line that declared the payment. This is a crime. And for the first time since I was 18, I felt something new, not fear, not sadness, but purpose. Because if they thought burying me once was enough to keep me gone, they were about to learn how wrong they were. If discovering my own death certificate felt like being shoved off a cliff, then walking into that cafe with a folder full of printed evidence felt like learning how to land on my feet. I chose a place in downtown Seattle, neutral, quiet, the kind with warm lights and overpriced pastries to meet the one person I trusted enough to say the words out loud. My parents declared me dead. His name was Alex Lopez. We'd met in college back when I was still stitching together my life with cheap ramen and late-night coding sessions. Alex had always been the kind of person who thrived on structure. While I was buried in algorithms and debugging, he was the guy organizing study groups, color-coding notes, and arguing with professors for fun. He'd gone to law school in Portland, passed the bar in Washington, and now worked at a small firm handling everything from tenant rights to white-collar crime. If anyone could help me understand what had been done to me, it was him. When he saw me approach his table, he smiled, then the smile faded when he noticed the tightness in my face. "You okay?" he asked. "No," I said, dropping the folder onto the table, the papers inside fanning slightly like a deck of cursed cards. "And I need you to read all of this. Right now." He opened the folder. The obituary sat on top. Then the death certificate. Then the insurance summary. I watched his expression shift from curiosity to disbelief to something darker. His brows knit together. His jaw clenched. "Lily, what the hell am I looking at?" "My death," I said simply. He read in silence for several minutes. When he finally looked up, his voice was low and controlled, the way someone sounds right before they explode. "This isn't just wrong. This is fraud. Multiple layers of fraud. Insurance fraud, forged medical documents, false declarations to government agencies." He shuffled the papers again. "Your mother signed your death certificate?" "Yeah." I tried to sound detached, but my throat tightened anyway. "And your father collected the payout?" I nodded. He exhaled sharply. Jesus, Lily. For a moment, we sat in silence, the ambient cafe music feeling impossibly out of place. People around us sipped lattes, typed on laptops, laughed at something on their phones, completely unaware that at our table, we were piecing together the blueprint of a crime so grotesque it barely sounded real. Alex tapped the death certificate with his index finger. First step is confirming everything officially. You need full records from 3 places: the county sheriff's office, the hospital named here, though I'm guessing it's fake, and the funeral home. It is fake, I said. All of it. Then that, he said, makes it even worse. He opened his laptop and started typing rapidly, glasses sliding down the bridge of his nose. We'll need to request official copies of everything: the accident report, the coroner's notes, the hospital intake, the funeral home logs. If any of those don't exist, and I'm assuming they won't, that's proof of deliberate fabrication. What about the doctor? I asked. The one who signed the certificate? He scrolled through public medical licensing databases. There's no doctor registered under that name in the entire state, he said. Either the signature was forged, or they used the name of someone who doesn't exist. I swallowed hard. They went through all of this, just for money. Alex paused, looking at me with a softness I hadn't expected. Lily, they didn't just fake a paper trail. They erased your existence. That's not normal parental anger. That's criminal intent. His words hung between us, heavy and sharp. I forced myself forward. What about the insurance side? How do we confirm the payout? He nodded. I'll submit a formal request for your policy details and the claim file. If the insurance company already flagged anything suspicious back then, it'll be in their records. If not, they'll be very interested once they see you're, well, alive? I finished bitterly. He didn't laugh. Alive changes everything. I am. An hour later, we had a plan, a real one. Legal, methodical, terrifying. Step 1. Gather all documents officially. Step 2. Present findings to a district attorney. Step 3. Prepare for litigation, criminal charges, and a full audit of the insurance payout. Step 4. Confront the people who had killed me on paper. Before we left the cafe, Alex scribbled on a napkin the timeline of my death. Insurance policy opened when I was 15. Death certificate filed at 18. Claim submitted 5 days later. Payout issued 6 months after that. And then he circled a cluster of dates in red ink. What's that? I asked. He tapped it. This is when your father paid off his mortgage. Another tap. This is when your mother expanded her event planning business. Another. And this is when Hannah got her car. I stared at the napkin, feeling something cold and clean settle in my veins. The kind of clarity that only comes after shock burns away. My funeral money had become their stepping stones. Their comfort. Their success. Their investment in the child they actually valued. I had told myself so many stories over the years that maybe they regretted how things ended, maybe they wondered if I was okay, maybe they prayed for me. But the truth was uglier, simpler, more final. They had profited from my absence. They had built a better life because I was dead. Alex packed up the papers carefully, as if handling explosives. If the DA takes this case, he said quietly, your dad and mom could face real time. Fraud this large? It's prison-level serious. And as for Hannah, he hesitated. What about her? If she used any of the money, college tuition, car payments, she could be considered a beneficiary to the fraud. My stomach twisted, but not with guilt. With clarity, the kind you don't come back from. On the walk back to my car, the rain started again, not a drizzle this time, but a steady downpour that soaked my jacket and plastered my hair to my skin. I stood there for a long moment, letting the cold wash over me, grounding myself in something real. For years, I had convinced myself I wanted nothing, no revenge, no closure, no confrontation. I told myself I had moved on. But standing in that rain with a folder full of forged documents and blood money, I felt something shift. This wasn't about closure anymore. This wasn't about healing. This was about truth. And about reclaiming the power they took from me when they signed my death certificate. I had walked out of that Ohio house as a powerless 18-year-old girl. But I would return eventually, not as their daughter, but as the ghost they created, the one who had come back to expose them. The weeks that followed felt unreal, like I was moving underwater, slow, deliberate, every motion carrying weight. Alex took charge of the legal labyrinth while I focused on gathering everything I could. It amazed me how much of my life fit into folders, PDFs, screenshots, saved emails, timestamps, metadata. Evidence of a crime I didn't know I'd been the victim of until 10 years later. Alex reached out to the district attorney's office in my home county. He warned me that DAs weren't always quick to act, that cases like this needed airtight proof, but when he called me afterward, his voice held a stunned disbelief. "Lily," he said, "they want to talk to us, today." The DA's name was Monica Alvarez, a sharp, composed woman whose presence filled the conference room, even through a video call. She listened as Alex walked her through the documents: the forged death certificate, the non-existent doctor, the fraudulent funeral home, the insurance payout. Monica's expression didn't change, but her eyes sharpened with every detail. When we finished, she leaned back in her chair. "This is one of the most elaborate personal fraud cases I've seen in years," she said. "And the cruelty." She shook her head slightly. "We'll open an investigation immediately." My breath caught. "Does that mean they'll be arrested?" "Eventually, if the evidence holds," she said. "But for now, we keep this sealed. We don't want to spook them before we're ready." "And what do you need from me?" I asked. "Stay quiet. Keep collecting anything that proves your identity and your timeline since leaving home. We'll subpoena the rest." Stay quiet. That was something I'd done my entire childhood. But this time, silence felt like power, not submission. Over the next weeks, my apartment became an investigation command center. I scanned every document: birth certificate, school records, my first paycheck, my college transcripts, utility bills, anything proving I'd been alive while Ohio claimed I was dead. I uploaded backups to encrypted cloud storage, emailed copies to myself under different accounts, and kept a physical binder locked in my desk drawer. I started journaling, too, not for myself, but for clarity. To record every memory from that year. The night they kicked me out, the first job I worked in Seattle, the people who could verify where I'd been. Trauma blurs things, writing made it solid again. And then, because I needed to feel like my voice still mattered somewhere, I created a blog under an anonymous name, Dead But Not Gone. I didn't mention my family. I didn't mention the town. I didn't post pictures. But I wrote about being erased. What it feels like to be alive and yet not exist. The comments trickled in from strangers who said they understood more than I'd expect: kids estranged from parents, people whose families pretended they didn't exist, others who'd felt buried in different ways. I never said the blog was mine, but writing it helped me stay sane while waiting for the next step. Alex was the one who discovered the opportunity I didn't know I needed. "Your parents," he said one evening, calling from his office, "host a massive Thanksgiving dinner every year. Looks like they invite half the church. And every Christmas Eve, they have a big family gathering with extended relatives." I froze. I hadn't thought about those holiday gatherings in years: perfectly decorated tables, heavy casseroles, people pretending to be wholesome while gossiping about the same neighbors they prayed with. "They still do that?" "Oh yes," Alex said dryly. "Your mom posts about it every year. Inspirational captions. Photos of homemade pies. Hashtags like, blessed beyond measure." I almost laughed. Of course she did. Then Alex's tone shifted lower, more careful. "The DA has a suggestion." I waited. "If you showed up at that gathering," he said, alive. "In front of everyone. Before they know you've filed anything." He paused. "People say things under shock. They confess, they react, they expose details they shouldn't. And with that many witnesses." My stomach tightened. It was risky. It would be emotional hell. It would mean walking back into the house that exiled me. But Monica's voice echoed over the speaker when she joined the call. "I'm not telling you to confront them," she clarified. "But if you choose to appear unexpectedly, it could strengthen the case. Dramatically, fraud cases often hinge on intent. Seeing their reactions in real time, that's a window into intent." Intent. The one word that mattered most. For days after that call, I couldn't sleep properly. My mind swung like a pendulum. Ignore them. You're free. You owe them nothing. But then the other voice returned, the one that had carried me through every late-night shift and coding assignment. They killed you on paper. They made a profit from your erasure. They don't get the last word. I'd left home as an 18-year-old who thought walking away was enough. But walking away hadn't stopped them from burying me. The only way to reclaim my life now was to rise from the grave they dug. One night, around 2 a.m., I stood in my bathroom, staring into the mirror. My reflection looked unfamiliar, older, steadier, the kind of woman who could walk into a room full of people who believed she was dead and not flinch. My eyes were clearer than I'd ever seen them. I touched the mirror lightly, fingertips cold. You're not her anymore. I whispered to myself. Not the girl with a duffel bag. Not the daughter they threw away. The next morning, I called Alex. I'm doing it, I said. He didn't ask if I was sure. He simply asked, when's the next family gathering? Thanksgiving, I said. A beat of silence. Then that's the day, he replied. After the call, I stood in my quiet apartment, clean counters, warm lamplight, soft hum of the refrigerator, and realized something else. For the first time in my life, I wasn't scared of them. Not anymore. Ignore them. You're free. You owe them nothing. But then the other voice returned, the one that had carried me through every late-night shift and coding assignment. They killed you on paper. They made a profit from your erasure. They don't get the last word. I'd left home as an 18-year-old who thought walking away was enough. But walking away hadn't stopped them from burying me. The only way to reclaim my life now was to rise from the grave they dug. And as I stood in front of the mirror again that night, wearing the calm expression of a woman who had survived everything meant to break her, I heard myself say the words that would anchor everything still to come. 10 years ago, I walked out like a child discarded. 10 years later, I'm returning as the ghost of the truth. Thanksgiving morning in Ohio always had a distinct smell, something between roasted turkey, pine candles, and cold air slipping under old window frames. The Carter house came into view, glowing with warm lights and holiday decorations. Cars crowded the driveway and lined the curb, SUVs, sedans, a church van. They had invited everyone, just like always. My mother didn't just throw gatherings, she hosted events. And this year, unbeknownst to her, her guest list included a ghost. I paid the driver, stepping out onto the pavement. My legs trembled slightly, but I didn't let the feeling rise into panic. Fear was an old friend. I'd lived with it too long for it to control me now. The porch was exactly as I remembered, same wooden swing, same ceramic turkey statue, same crack in the tile my father always promised to fix. I reached for the doorknob and found it unlocked, just as Alex had said it would be. Holiday traffic. Guests coming and going. The moment I stepped inside, the scent hit me like a punch to the chest. Cinnamon candles. Honey-glazed ham, fresh rolls. The foyer was dimly lit, decorated with autumn garlands. Voices spilled from the dining room, laughter, clinking glasses, the rise and fall of cheerful conversation. For a moment, the familiarity made me dizzy. 10 years. 10 years of imagining this moment. 10 years of being dead in this house. I took one breath, then another. Then I walked. Their dining room had always been the centerpiece of the house, long oak table, fancy tablecloth, candles glowing down the middle like some holiday advertisement. Hannah sat at the center, hair curled perfectly, wearing a designer sweater. My father was at the head of the table, carving turkey with a practiced smile. My mother floated between guests with a tray of bread rolls, performing benevolence the way some people breathe. No one noticed me at first. I stepped fully into the doorway, watching them like someone watching strangers play parts in a movie. A few heads turned, people who didn't recognize me but sensed something slightly off, the way animals sense earthquakes early. Then an older cousin, fork halfway to his mouth, squinted at me. His face drained of color. "Oh my God," he whispered, audible even over the chatter. "Lily?" Everything froze. One by one, heads turned. Conversations halted mid-sentence. A glass slipped from someone's hand and shattered on the floor. My mother was the last to face me. When she did, the tray tilted dangerously in her hands. Her smile collapsed. Her entire body went rigid. I stepped forward, steady, unhurried. "Hi everyone," I said, my voice calm and unmistakably alive. "Remember me?" A few people gasped. Someone whispered a prayer. My father's carving knife clattered to the table. Hannah's face went white, then blotchy red. My mother took a stumbling step backward. She tried to speak, her voice trembling. "Con la AI? This isn't funny." I let the question sit in the air, tasting its absurdity. "Who am I?" I repeated quietly. "You signed my death certificate. I assumed you'd recognize me." A murmur rippled through the room, confusion, shock, fear. I reached into my bag and pulled out the folder. Evidence. My resurrection. I laid the papers on the tablecloth, right beside the turkey. "Let's start with this," I said, sliding the death certificate forward. Cause of death, car accident. Informant, Diane Carter. All eyes snapped to my mother. Someone, an aunt, gasped. "Diane, you said she died. You said you buried her." My mother's lips trembled violently. I thought there was a mistake. Someone told us." "No," I cut in, my voice sharp enough to slice through her performance. "You didn't think. You planned." I lifted the next document. "Here's the insurance payout. Issued 6 months after my death. $280,000 paid directly to Mark and Diane Carter." My father slammed his fist on the table. "This is outrageous. Where did you get that?" "From the insurance company," I said coolly. "After I informed them that the girl you declared dead is very much alive." Gasps, whispers. People shifting in their seats. I wasn't done. I pulled out a printed bank ledger. Mortgage paid off 3 months after the payout. I slid it across the table. Then Hannah's brand new SUV. Then tuition payments. Then a business loan for Mom's event company, all traced back to the same source. My mother's voice cracked. Stop this." I looked at her, my expression flat. "Stop telling the truth?" The room erupted in shock. Someone from church, the same pastor who had spoken at their fake memorial, stood up, face red with fury. "Diane, you told the entire congregation she died. You accepted donations. You held grief counseling sessions." Hannah burst into tears. "I didn't know. I swear, I didn't know." I raised an eyebrow. "You wrote college essays about losing your sister." Gasps again. "You posted tributes online. You used my death for sympathy points every year." She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. I turned to the room. "In case anyone is confused, yes, I've already filed with the district attorney. And with the insurance company. This is fraud. Federal fraud, felony charges. Prison time. Asset seizure." My father stood abruptly, knocking over his chair. "You have no right to come in here and—" "I have every right," I said, cutting him off. "You declared me dead. I get to show you what a dead girl looks like when she walks back into the room." The explosion came from the most unexpected place, my grandmother. She rose shakily from her seat, pointing a trembling finger at my parents. "How could you?" she shouted, voice cracking. "How could you do this to your own child?" Then another voice, my father's former colleague from the insurance industry, stood up, his face twisted in disgust. "Mark, I trusted you. I vouched for you. And you used your daughter's death, your fake daughter's death, to commit fraud?" He slammed his drink on the table. "I don't want anything to do with you." Chaos broke open like a storm, people shouting, people crying, people accusing. The Golden family image shattered in a single night. I didn't flinch. I didn't apologize. I didn't comfort anyone. I looked directly at my parents' faces, pale, hands shaking, the truth finally strangling them. 10 years ago, I said softly. You told me to get out. You said I was no longer your daughter. I stepped back, letting silence settle like ash. Fine. From today on, you have no right to call yourselves my parents. It screeched nearly, and a murmur rippled through the room, some horrified, some relieved the truth was finally out. I didn't come here for revenge, I said. I came to return the truth to the people you lied to. Then I turned away. Slowly, deliberately. Walking out of that house didn't feel like it did when I was 18, frightened, unsteady, unsure of the world waiting outside. This time, I walked out knowing exactly who I was. Knowing exactly who they were. Behind me, I heard shouting, crying, denial, accusations, chaos swallowing the Carter family whole. But I didn't look back. Not once. The fallout began before I even made it back to Seattle. By the next morning, my phone was vibrating nonstop texts, missed calls, voicemails, stacked like dominoes. Somehow, someone at the gathering had recorded part of the confrontation and sent it to a cousin, who sent it to a neighbor, who sent it to someone from church. In small-town Ohio, news travels faster than morality. By noon, the entire community knew the Carter family's secret. The daughter they buried was alive. And she had walked into Thanksgiving like Lazarus with receipts. At first, the messages were hesitant, confused. "Lily, is it really you? We heard something happen last night. Are you okay? I'm so sorry if I ever believed what they told us." Then came the guilt-soaked ones. "I always thought something felt off. It's Suliverty Tang. Your mother talked about you so often, but never with details. We should have asked more questions." There were even apologies from people who had whispered behind my back in high school, people who, 10 years ago, watched me walk out of town with a duffel bag and pretended not to see. By evening, the story had spread far beyond the cul-de-sac. Someone had tipped off the local news. The headline hit like a drumbeat. Ohio couple accused of faking daughter's death to collect insurance payout. The article described everything in stark, clinical language: falsified documents, non-existent doctors, suspicious funeral home, and a daughter me who had reappeared with evidence. They quoted neighbors, expressing disbelief. They quoted family members in shock. And they quoted Monica Alvarez, the prosecutor, who did not mince words. In my career, this is one of the most disturbing acts of familial fraud I've encountered. This was not a mistake. This was a deliberate, orchestrated scheme, carried out over several years. The video segment that followed showed a blurred-out clip of the chaos during Thanksgiving dinner. Even blurred, you could hear the shouting. Someone had also snapped photos of my mother collapsing into a dining chair, my father gripping the table like he was drowning, Hannah mid-sob. The image was surreal, the perfect Carter family finally exposed for what they really were. Within 48 hours, the legal system moved. My mother was arrested first. Charged with insurance fraud, falsifying medical documents, filing false reports, financial deception, and misappropriation of funds obtained under fraudulent circumstances. She was handcuffed in her own living room while neighbors watched from their porches, murmuring behind half-closed blinds. My father wasn't far behind. He was brought in as a co-conspirator, someone who knowingly benefited from the fraud. He tried to claim ignorance, but the signed bank transfers told a different story. Mortgage payments, business purchases, tuition fees, all tied to the money meant for a dead child. The insurance company came next. They sent a demand letter, repayment of the full $280,000 plus interest, plus penalties. When my parents couldn't pay and, of course, they couldn't, foreclosure proceedings began on the house. The home they bought with my funeral money was now being taken because they'd stolen that money in the first place. Hannah's life unraveled like loose thread. Her boyfriend dumped her days after the story broke. Her workplace, a marketing firm that prided itself on family values, put her on unpaid leave until further notice. She posted a long, tearful Instagram story blaming me for destroying her life. She never once mentioned that she had benefited from the same money that came from my supposed death. In her mind, she was the victim. I was the villain who had shown up and ruined the fantasy. Meanwhile, something unexpected happened to me. My blog exploded. Dead but not gone, which had maybe 20 readers before all this, suddenly went viral. People shared it across forums and support groups. Messages flooded in hundreds, then thousands. Adult children whose parents had disowned them. Kids who were scapegoated in perfect families. People who were erased in quieter, but equally brutal ways. They wrote paragraphs, pages, essays. Some had never told anyone their stories before. They wrote to me like I was a lighthouse in fog. One message read, "When you showed up alive, you showed up for all of us." Another, You made me believe my truth matters, even if my family denies it. Dilfanged. And this one, which made me cry unexpectedly at 2 in the morning. You aren't the only ghost, but you're the first one I've seen rise. People asked for interviews, podcasts, collaborations. I declined them all. Not because I was afraid, but because this had never been about attention. I didn't want fame. I wanted my story back. I didn't feel triumphant watching my parents fall. There was no thrill, no rush, no spark of satisfaction. What I felt was release. A weight lifting off my bones that I didn't know I'd been carrying. For the first time in my life, what had been done to me wasn't being denied, minimized, or rewritten. The truth was out so public, so undeniable, that even the people who built their reputations on lies couldn't escape it. And standing in the quiet of my Seattle apartment, reading messages from strangers who understood me better than my own family ever had, I whispered something into the stillness. Finally, the story belongs to me. Not them, not their lies. Not their church friends. Not the obituary they wrote. Me. That was the beginning of my freedom, not the confrontation, not the shouting, not the courtroom. But the moment I realized I no longer needed their acknowledgement, or their apology, or their love. I only needed the truth. And now I had it. It took months before he reached out. Long enough for the court hearings to finish, long enough for the news cycle to quiet down, long enough for the community's shock to fade into a kind of heavy, embarrassed silence. By then, my mother was awaiting sentencing, Hannah had gone largely off-grid, and my father, well, my father had vanished from public view altogether. Which is why the simple email that arrived in my inbox, one rainy Thursday evening, felt surreal. Subject: please. One conversation. No greeting. No excuses. No signature. Just a location, a small cafe halfway between Columbus and Cleveland, neutral territory, and a time. Saturday, noon. I stared at the screen for a long time, feeling nothing at first. No fear, no anger. Just a strange, hollow curiosity, like looking at an old photograph of someone you once knew but could no longer name. Eventually, I replied with one word, okay. When I arrived that Saturday, the cafe was nearly empty. Soft jazz played in the background, and the smell of roasted coffee beans hung warm in the air. He was already there, sitting in a corner booth with his hands clasped tightly in front of him. My father. Except he was barely recognizable. The man who once dominated every room he walked into now looked small, thinner, shoulders slouched, hair grayer than I remembered. His suit hung loosely on him, as though it belonged to another man. When he looked up and saw me, something in his face collapsed. Lily, he breathed, like saying my name hurt him. I slid into the seat across from him. You asked for a conversation. I said, so talk. It's enough to pace of in. He swallowed hard and nodded, fingers trembling slightly as they tapped against his coffee cup. I owe you the truth. I didn't respond, I simply waited. He took a breath, shaky, then began. At first, I was angry, he admitted. When you left. When you talked back. When you chose your own future over the one we wanted for you. Your mother said you were becoming ungrateful. Out of control. I believed her. I stayed silent. I told myself you'd come crawling back, he continued. You were 18. No money. No support. I thought life would break you, and when you came home, you'd be obedient again. The shame in his voice was unmistakable. But you didn't come back. And that made your mother furious. I kept my hands folded neatly on the table. Go on. He looked down at his coffee, unable to meet my gaze. When she brought up the insurance policy, I didn't want to hear the details. I didn't ask questions. I didn't want to know, he closed his eyes. We were drowning in debt. The house. Hannah's tuition. Your mother's business. I let her talk me into signing what she needed me to sign. I told myself it was just paperwork. And, when you realized I was alive? I asked quietly. He opened his eyes then, and they were full of something I hadn't seen before, not authority, not anger, but raw, fragile fear. About a year after we filed the claim, I hired someone to check on you. The words hit me like ice water. You hired a private investigator? He nodded miserably. I needed to know if you were okay. If you were alive. And when you learned I was? He let out a broken breath. I panicked. If we reversed it, we'd lose everything. The house. Our jobs. Our reputation. There would be investigations, audits. Prison. So you pretended I was dead, I said, my voice steady. For 10 years. His silence was an admission. Say it, I demanded softly. His voice cracked. I was a coward. I chose money. I chose comfort. I chose the life we'd built over doing the right thing. I let your mother make all the decisions because I didn't want to face the consequences of the first one. There it was. The truth. Ugly, heavy, irrevocable. He looked at me, then really looked, and his eyes filled with tears. I know I don't deserve forgiveness. I know I don't deserve to call you my daughter. But I needed you to hear this from me. Not from the courts. Not from the news. From me. For a long moment, we sat in silence. And in that silence, I realized something important. I felt nothing for him anymore. No longing, no grief. No ache for the father I once wished I had. Whatever bond once existed had withered so completely that all that remained was clarity. Let me ask you something, I said quietly. If none of this had come out, if I hadn't walked into that Thanksgiving dinner, would you have ever told the truth? His eyes dropped instantly. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. Thank you, I said softly. That tells me everything. He nodded, tears slipping down his cheeks. Then, with shaking hands, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a worn white envelope. He set it on the table between us. This is what should have been yours, he said. A portion of what we owed you. I know it's not enough. It never could be. But it's something. I stared at the envelope. Money. A gesture of guilt. A fraction of a debt that could never truly be repaid. I picked it up not as a gift, not as inheritance, not as anything sentimental. As payment, as restitution, as closure. I'll take it, I said calmly. But not for me. I slid the envelope into my bag. I'm going to use it to help kids like I once was. Kids who get pushed out of homes that were supposed to protect them. He nodded, unable to speak. I stood. He remained seated, staring at his trembling hands as though the truth had aged him 20 years. Goodbye, I said gently. And please understand. I'm not your daughter anymore, not by law, not by blood, not by choice. He flinched, but he didn't argue. He didn't beg. He didn't chase after me. He just sat there small, broken. Alone, finally forced to live with what he'd done. And as I stepped out of the cafe into the gray afternoon light, I felt no triumph. Only a deep, steady peace. Some endings aren't loud. Some endings aren't cruel. Some endings simply free you. 2 years passed quietly, steadily, without drama or collapse. Not because nothing happened, but because everything that mattered finally happened on my terms. The legal storm that once hung over my life eventually ran its course. My parents received suspended sentences, fines so large they would be paying them for the rest of their lives, and a community reputation so shattered it would never mend. The house, the same one I had been kicked out of at 18, was foreclosed on and auctioned off. I didn't attend the hearing. I didn't watch the news segment replaying the verdict. I didn't speak to them again. And when my mother suffered a health scare months later and distant relatives whispered about funerals and obligations, I stayed home. I didn't go back to that town. Not even to say goodbye. Some goodbyes don't need to be spoken, they're lived. During those 2 years, my life rebuilt itself in ways I never expected. At the tech firm, I rose from senior engineer to leading an entire cybersecurity team, something I had once only dreamed about during sleepless nights in cheap shared apartments. My coworkers trusted me. My supervisors relied on me. I belonged in a world built on logic, truth, and precision, not on emotional manipulation or fake narratives. I also started something small almost by accident. A support group. At first, it was just an anonymous forum connected to my blog, a space where people who'd been erased, scapegoated, or betrayed by their families could write without being judged. But it grew. Messages turned into weekly online meetups. Meetups turned into a podcast where I invited guests to tell their stories: teachers, nurses, coders, artists, waitresses, each one carrying a burden they had never been allowed to put down anywhere else. I didn't speak about my family anymore. Not because it hurt, but because their chapter in my life had already closed. Now, I wanted to help other people write their next chapters too. The envelope my father gave me crumpled, heavy, reeking of guilt, became something entirely different. I split it in half. One part funded a scholarship program for teenagers who wanted to study tech, but came from homes where education was discouraged or financially impossible. The other part went to a shelter for homeless youth, the ones who, like me once, had nowhere to go when the people meant to protect them turned them out. It felt right. It felt like reclaiming something that had once been taken by force. And then came the moment that surprised even me. The first holiday season I spent intentionally joyfully, surrounded not by blood relatives, but by people who had chosen me and whom I had chosen in return. My apartment wasn't large, and the dining table wasn't some elaborate, magazine-worthy centerpiece. But on Friendsgiving night, the room glowed with soft lights and mismatched plates, and every seat was filled. There was Rachel, my coworker who always brought too many pies. Jordan, who teased me about my obsession with code efficiency. Nisha, who had shared her own story of estrangement on the podcast and quickly become one of my closest friends. Emily and Mateo from my team, both loud and warm and shamelessly competitive about board games. And behind me in the kitchen, someone I hadn't expected to be part of my life 2 years earlier, a partner who met me halfway in everything, who never questioned the shadows of my past but helped me build something steadier, softer, deeper. The laughter in my apartment was messy and real, not the stiff, curated joy my mother once orchestrated at her holiday events. No comparisons. No forced roles. No perfection. Just warmth. Just connection. Just family chosen, not inherited. I stood for a long moment in the doorway, watching everyone pass dishes, tease each other, spill drinks, scramble for forks, argue about who overcooked the rolls, and something inside me loosened in a way I didn't know it still needed to. For the first time, I saw clearly. Family isn't who you're born to. Family is who builds a life with you. I wasn't the dead girl anymore. I wasn't the scapegoat. I wasn't the daughter erased for profit. I was Lily Carter, alive, whole, and finally belonging somewhere. Later that night, after the dishes were washed and everyone had left, I sat by the window with a mug of tea, looking at the quiet city lights. A different kind of peace settled over me, not the numb silence I had grown up with, but a warm, grounded calm. In that silence, I found words rising in me, words I wished I could send back in time to the girl I used to be. You were never unworthy. You were never the problem. You were never disposable. And then, almost like a closing monologue, I felt myself speaking softly into the dim apartment, as though addressing the audience who had walked this journey with me. 10 years ago, they said I wasn't their daughter anymore. 10 years later, they signed papers declaring me dead. They wanted me gone, erased. Fine, I disappeared. But not the way they hoped. I disappeared from their world, not my own. And in doing so, I found a life they never could have imagined for me. This time, I carry every ounce of power they once stole. And I will never hand it back. I set down my mug and smiled, small, real, certain. Then I asked the only question that mattered anymore, the one I now asked at the end of every podcast episode, every blog post, every story shared in my support groups. If you've ever been treated like you don't exist, what will you choose next? Try to earn back a place in a home that never saw your worth? Or build a life where you decide who you are and what you're worth? And one more thing, where in the world are you listening from tonight?